Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The hard drive died at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and with it, supposedly, went 12 years of Dr. Vincent Kowalski's life work. I'm Jake Brennan, and I've spent the last 8 years pulling digital ghosts from the machines everyone else has given up on. Corporate espionage, divorce cases, insurance fraud. If there's data someone wants to stay buried, I'm the guy they call to dig it up. My workshop in Pasadena sits 3 blocks from JPL, close enough that half my clients are aerospace contractors trying to recover accidentally wiped prototypes before their competitors do. Kowalski walked into my shop that Tuesday morning looking like he hadn't slept in a month. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hands that trembled when he signed the work order. The drive he handed me was a military-grade Seagate, the kind with enough encryption to make the NSA sweat. "Everything's on there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My whole career, 23 years at NASA, gone." I quoted him my standard rate, $1,500 for deep recovery, no guarantees. He paid in cash without blinking. That should have been my first red flag. The second flag came when I plugged the drive into my recovery rig. The partition table wasn't just corrupted, it was surgically destroyed. Someone had taken a digital blowtorch to this thing, burning through layers of data with military precision. This wasn't an accident or a virus, this was a professional wipe job. But here's the thing about digital destruction, it's never complete. Data leaves shadows, fragments scattered across magnetic clusters like breadcrumbs leading back to the source. After 48 hours of reconstructive work, I started pulling files from the void. Mission reports, budget allocations, personnel assignments, all stamped with classification levels I'd never seen before, and all of it related to something called the Europa Deep Drill Project. The deeper I dug, the weirder it got. Requisitions for industrial heating equipment rated for temperatures that would melt titanium. Medical reports describing psychological evaluations for extreme isolation scenarios. Shipping manifests for excavation gear that wouldn't make sense unless you were planning to dig through several miles of ice. But it was the final recovered fragment that made my blood run cold. A partial video file, timestamp corrupted, showing what looked like a mission control room in chaos. Screens flickering with seismic data, technicians shouting over alarms, and in the center of it all, a man's voice cutting through the noise. "Not a vent, it's a nest, and we just woke up the mother." The recording cut to static. When I tried to run it again, the file had corrupted itself into digital ash. That was 3 days ago. Kowalski hasn't returned my calls. His house sits empty, mail piling up on the porch. And every night since, I've been having the same dream. Standing at the edge of a hole that goes down forever, hearing something massive breathing in the dark below. I think I know why someone wanted that drive wiped. I just wish I'd left it that way. The next morning brought 2 things I wasn't expecting. A visit from federal agents and my oldest friend Tommy Hutchinson standing behind them with an expression that screamed apology. Agent Davidson was tall, clean-shaven, and carried himself like someone who'd spent too many years taking orders before learning to give them. His partner, Agent Brooks, had the dead eyes of a man who'd seen classified briefings that would make normal people lose sleep. "Mr. Brennan," Davidson said, settling into the folding chair across from my workbench. "We understand you've been working on a recovery job for Dr. Vincent Kowalski." I glanced at Tommy, who was examining his shoes with unusual interest. We'd known each other since high school. He'd gotten me into data recovery when his computer repair shop started taking on more complex jobs. Now he worked part-time for various government contractors, cleaning up digital messes that couldn't make it into official reports. "Can't discuss client work," I said. "Confidentiality agreement." Brooks smiled without warmth. "Dr. Kowalski is dead, Mr. Brennan. Car accident yesterday evening. Single vehicle collision on the 110 freeway. Very tragic." The words hit like ice water. 3 days ago, Kowalski had been sitting in that same chair, nervous but very much alive. Now they were telling me he'd driven into a concrete barrier at 60 miles per hour. "Funny thing about the accident scene," Davidson continued. "No skid marks, no signs he tried to brake. Almost like he just decided to end it." Tommy finally spoke up. Jake, they're not here to jam you up. They just need to know what you found on that drive. I studied the three of them. Tommy wouldn't have brought feds to my shop unless something seriously fucked up was happening. But something about this whole situation felt wrong, like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Most of the drive was toast, I said carefully. Some mission reports, budget stuff, boring government paperwork. And the video file? Brooks asked. That stopped me cold. I hadn't mentioned the video to anyone. The only way they could know about it was if they'd been monitoring my recovery process in real time, which meant either my systems were compromised or they had access to equipment that made my best rigs look like pocket calculators. Corrupted fragment, I said. Audio track was garbage. Couldn't make out what anyone was saying. Davidson nodded, but his eyes suggested he knew I was lying. We're going to need that drive, Mr. Brennan, and any backup copies you might have made. What's this about? National security, Brooks said, like that explained everything. I handed over the external drive containing my recovery work, watching as Davidson sealed it in what looked like a military evidence bag. But I didn't mention the encrypted flash drive hidden in my coffee maker, the one containing copies of everything I'd pulled from Kowalski's data. After they left, Tommy stuck around to help me clean up the workbench. His hands shook slightly as he sorted through cables and connector adapters. You okay? I asked. Jake, you don't understand what you stumbled into. That Europa project, it wasn't just some research mission. They were drilling into something that should have stayed buried. How do you know that? Tommy pulled out his phone, showed me a text message thread. The contact was listed as DK, and the most recent message was timestamped from 2 days ago. They found something under the ice. Something big. If anything happens to me, Jake Brennan has the files. Trust him. Kowalski sent this to me right before his drive got wiped, Tommy said. He was scared, Jake. Really fucking scared. I stared at the message. Kowalski had been planning for this. He'd wanted someone to find those files, wanted the information to survive whatever was coming for him. What do you think happened out there? I asked. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. I've worked cleanup on enough black projects to know when something goes sideways. Usually it's human error, budget overruns, political bullshit. But this feels different. Like they opened a door they can't close. He gathered his tools, preparing to leave. Whatever you do, don't go digging any deeper into this. Some secrets are classified for good reasons. But as I watched his car disappear down the street, I was already thinking about the encrypted drive hidden in my kitchen. Tommy's warning felt less like advice and more like a challenge, and I'd never been good at walking away from a puzzle, especially one that had already cost a man his life. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the files I'd hidden from the feds. Most of it was standard project documentation, but buried in the metadata were timestamps that didn't make sense. According to the file properties, some of these reports had been created weeks after the project's official termination date. Either someone had been keeping very unofficial records, or the Europa Deep Drill project was still active long after NASA claimed it had been shut down. I opened my laptop and started researching Dr. Vincent Kowalski's background. If I was going to honor his trust, I needed to understand what he'd been running from, and why someone had been willing to kill to keep it quiet. 3 locations held the keys to Vincent Kowalski's secret: his empty house in Altadena, the abandoned storage unit in Glendale, and the dive bar in Burbank where his research partner still drank away his nightmares. I started with the house. Kowalski's neighborhood sat in the foothills, where aerospace engineers and JPL contractors built mid-century dreams on lots carved from scrub brush and optimism. His place was a typical ranch-style home with solar panels and a Tesla in the driveway, the kind of setup that screamed respectable government scientist. The key was exactly where Tommy said it would be, under the fake rock by the front steps. Inside, everything looked normal except for the study. Books scattered across the floor, file cabinets standing open and empty, computer cables dangling from an obviously missing desktop tower. Someone had beaten me here, but they'd missed the basement workshop. Behind a false panel next to the water heater, I found Kowalski's real office: 3 monitors, a high-end server rack, and enough electromagnetic shielding to block a nuclear pulse. This was where serious work got done, away from prying eyes and government oversight. The computers were gone, but the guy had been paranoid enough to hide backup drives in the strangest places. I found one taped inside the cover of a 1987 phone book, another sealed in a mason jar behind the furnace filter. Old-school dead drops that only someone with Cold War training would think to use. The drives contained personal logs, video entries Kowalski had recorded during the final months of the Europa project. I plugged one into my laptop and watched a tired-looking man explain why he couldn't sleep anymore. Day 847 of the drilling operation, Kowalski said to the camera. Heat signatures are intensifying as we approach the 23-kilometer mark. Bauer thinks we're hitting volcanic activity, but the thermal readings don't match any geological model we've run. The heat isn't diffusing. It's concentrated, like something's generating it from a central source. He paused, rubbing his eyes. The worst part is the seismic feedback. Every time we advance the drill, we get these low-frequency vibrations through the ice. Hansen from the audio analysis team swears it sounds organic, like breathing. The next location was the storage unit in Glendale, one of those industrial complexes where people stash the pieces of their lives they can't quite throw away. Unit 247 was registered under a false name, but Kowalski's personal logs had included the access code. Inside, I found the physical evidence, printed photographs, technical schematics, and geological samples that looked like nothing I'd ever seen. The rock specimens were dark, almost black, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When I touched one, it was warm despite sitting in an unheated storage unit for months. But the photographs were what made my hands shake. Satellite images of Europa's surface showing the drill site, but taken from an angle that revealed something the official mission reports had never mentioned. The ice around the drilling location had developed cracks radiating outward in a perfect spiral pattern, like something underneath was pushing up with tremendous force. The images were dated 3 weeks after NASA announced the project's suspension. The final stop was Murphy's Tavern in Burbank, a pilot's bar where aerospace workers went to forget about classified briefings and budget cuts. According to Kowalski's files, Dr. Richard Bauer had been drowning his memories there every night since returning from the Europa monitoring station. I found him at the end of the bar, exactly where Tommy said he'd be. Mid-50s, greying beard, and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen classified hell. When I mentioned Kowalski's name, his grip tightened around his whiskey glass. "Vince is dead," he said without looking up. "Car accident, real convenient timing." "I know, I'm trying to figure out why." Bauer studied me for a long moment. "You're the data recovery guy, the one who pulled his files." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Want to tell me what really happened out there?" He finished his drink and ordered another. "You ever hear of the Fermi paradox? Where the hell is everybody? Universe should be crawling with intelligent life, but we've never found so much as a radio signal." "Yeah, so maybe we were looking in the wrong places. Maybe intelligence doesn't evolve in solar systems like ours. Maybe it evolves in the deep places, where liquid water stays hidden under miles of ice for billions of years." Bauer's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The heat signature we were tracking wasn't geological. It was biological. Something massive. Something that had been sleeping under Europa's ice since before Earth had complex life. And we drilled right into its fucking nest. He pulled out his phone, showed me a video file. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 3 hours before the official mission termination. The footage showed the drill control room. Banks of monitors displaying seismic data, temperature readings climbing beyond safe operational limits, and technicians arguing over communication channels. "Watch the thermal imaging," Bauer said. On screen, the heat signature began to change. What had appeared as a stationary hotspot started moving, rising through the ice toward the drill site. The thermal bloom expanded, taking on an organic shape that looked disturbingly like something with limbs and a central body mass. "That's when we lost contact with the drill head," Bauer explained. But the temperature readings kept climbing. Whatever was down there had grabbed our equipment and was using it to melt its way to the surface. The video showed Kowalski stepping up to the main communications console, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All stations, This is mission control. Emergency shutdown procedures are now in effect. We are not dealing with a geological formation. Repeat, this is not a vent, it's a nest. And we just woke up the mother. Static consumed the feed. When the image cleared, half the monitoring stations were dark, and emergency lights were flashing throughout the control room. How long before it reaches the surface? Someone shouted. Based on current thermal expansion, Kowalski replied, maybe 6 weeks, maybe less. The recording ended. Bauer tucked his phone away and stared into his whiskey. That was 8 months ago, he said. You do the math. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What happened to the monitoring stations? Are they still tracking it? Officially, the whole project was shut down due to budget constraints. All monitoring equipment was remotely deactivated to prevent contamination of the drilling site. Bauer's laugh was bitter. Unofficially, we've been getting intermittent signals from our seismic sensors ever since. Whatever we found down there is still moving, still rising through the ice. He stood up, tossed money on the bar. Vince tried to warn people, tried to get someone in Congress to listen. That's why he's dead, and that's why you need to be very careful about what you do with those files. As he walked toward the exit, I called after him. Where are you going? Home to pack, he said without turning around. Got a cabin in Montana, far from any major cities. When that thing breaks through Europa's ice, I want to be as far from civilization as possible. After he left, I sat alone at the bar, processing what I'd learned. The Europa Deep Drill project hadn't been searching for microbial life or geological formations. They'd awakened something ancient, something that had been sleeping in the dark waters beneath Europa's ice for eons. And if Bauer was right, it was still coming. The quiet lasted exactly 18 hours. I spent that time in my apartment, combing through Kowalski's files and cross-referencing the thermal imaging data with publicly available information about Europa's geological surveys. The official NASA reports painted a picture of routine scientific exploration, ice sample analysis, subsurface mapping, basic astrobiology research. But the classified documents told a different story entirely. The drilling operation had been fast-tracked through approval committees that normally took years to authorize deep space missions. Funding came from defense contractors with names I recognized: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics. Companies that built weapons, not scientific instruments. Around midnight, my secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or join Kowalski. I powered down my laptop and double-checked the locks on my apartment door. Someone was watching, tracking my research progress with surgical precision. The smart move would have been to destroy everything and disappear, maybe take a long vacation in some place without internet access. Instead, I called Tommy. Jesus, Jake, it's past midnight. What's wrong? I need to show you something. Can you meet me at the shop in an hour? There was a pause. This about the Kowalski stuff? I told you to drop it. Just come look at what I found. You were right about the door they can't close. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, 1 hour. Tommy arrived at my workshop, looking nervous, constantly checking the street through the front windows. I'd laid out printed copies of the most damning evidence: thermal imaging that showed the biological heat signature, budget allocations for military hardware, and personnel files indicating the Europa project team had included xenobiologists and bioweapons specialists. Fuck me, Tommy said, studying the documents. This is way bigger than I thought. Look at this, I said, pointing to a requisition order dated 2 weeks before the project's official termination. They were ordering cryocontainment units, industrial-grade stuff, the kind you'd use to store biological samples at absolute zero. Tommy's face went pale. Jake, you need to burn all of this and get out of town. Tonight. Why? What aren't you telling me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents like they might burst into flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because I'm the one who's been reporting your progress to them. The words hit like a physical blow. I stepped back from the table, studying my oldest friend's face for any sign that he was joking. But Tommy's expression held nothing but guilt and genuine fear. How long? I asked. Since the beginning. They approached me right after you took the Kowalski job. Said it was a matter of national security, that they just needed to monitor what you recovered from the drive. And you believed them. I believed the $20,000 they paid me. Tommy's voice cracked. Jake, I've got 3 kids and a mortgage. When federal agents show up at your door with a briefcase full of cash and tell you to keep tabs on your friend's computer work, you don't ask a lot of questions. I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a supporting beam giving way in a structure I thought was solid. Tommy had been my closest friend for 15 years. We'd built our businesses together, shared beers and war stories, trusted each other with secrets that could have ruined careers. Are they coming here? I asked. They're already here. Through the front window, I saw black SUVs pulling up to the curb. Men in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. This wasn't a polite federal inquiry. This was a cleanup operation. Back door, I said, grabbing the most important files. Jake, don't run. They just want the documents. Give them what they want and this all goes away. I stared at him. You really think they're just going to let me walk away after everything I've seen? The front door exploded inward, replaced by a cloud of smoke and debris. Tactical lights cut through the darkness, followed by shouted commands that echoed off the workshop walls. I ran. The back alley behind my building connected to a maze of service roads that wound between industrial complexes and shipping warehouses. I'd explored these routes during late-night coffee runs, never imagining I'd need them as escape routes from federal agents. Behind me, Tommy's voice rose above the tactical chatter. He went out the back, northeast toward the storage yards. Even now, even after confessing his betrayal, he was still feeding them information. The realization stung worse than the cold air burning my lungs as I sprinted between shipping containers. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, unknown number. Mr. Brennan, a familiar voice said. Agent Davidson. This is becoming unnecessarily complicated. Funny, I was thinking the same thing. We know you have copies of the Kowalski files. We know you've been investigating the Europa project. What we need to understand is how much damage you've already done. I ducked behind a parked delivery truck, trying to catch my breath. Damage to what? Your cover-up? Mr. Brennan, there are things about that project that go beyond classified. Things that would cause mass panic if they became public knowledge. Like the fact that you woke up something under Europa's ice, something that's still alive and moving toward the surface. The line went quiet for several seconds. When Davidson spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, less bureaucratic authority, more genuine concern. How much do you know about containment protocols? Enough to know you don't have any for whatever's coming up through that ice. You're wrong. We've been preparing for 8 months. Deep space monitoring stations, orbital defense platforms, contingency plans that extend all the way to nuclear options. But all of that preparation depends on public ignorance. The moment people find out what's really happening, our ability to respond effectively disappears. I tried to process what he was telling me. You're planning to nuke Europa? If necessary. But first, we need to know if that thing can survive in Earth's environment. The biological samples we recovered before losing contact suggest it's adapted for extreme conditions. High radiation, low temperatures, zero atmosphere. It might die the moment it reaches Europa's surface. And if it doesn't? Then we have bigger problems than classified documents. Through the warehouse district, I could hear vehicles moving in a coordinated search pattern. They were closing the net, using Tommy's knowledge of my usual routes to anticipate my movements. What do you want from me? I asked. Total cooperation, complete data recovery on everything Kowalski hid, and most importantly, your silence until we determine the scope of the threat. And if I refuse, then you become a national security risk that needs to be neutralized. The call ended. I was alone in an industrial wasteland, hunted by federal agents, abandoned by my closest friend, and sitting on information that could either save the world or cause mass hysteria. But the worst part was the growing realization that my obsession with solving puzzles had made me part of the problem. Every file I'd recovered, every secret I'd uncovered, had brought me deeper into a conspiracy that was bigger and more dangerous than anything I'd imagined. Kowalski had died trying to warn people about what was coming. Now I understood why. The truth about Europa wasn't just classified, it was the kind of information that could collapse governments and destroy civilizations. And I was the only person left who knew the complete story. In the distance, I heard dogs barking. They'd brought K9 units to track my scent through the warehouse district. Professional hunters for a target who'd finally understood he was completely out of his depth. I had maybe 10 minutes before they found me. 10 minutes to decide whether to surrender and hope Davidson was telling the truth about containment protocols, or disappear completely and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Either way, the quiet was over. The abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath downtown Los Angeles hadn't seen human activity since the 1990s. Perfect for a man who needed to disappear while piecing together fragments of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. I'd been underground for 6 hours, surviving on vending machine coffee and the adrenaline that comes from having your entire world collapse in a single night. Tommy's betrayal still felt like a fresh wound, but the tactical pursuit through the warehouse district had crystallized something important. I was no longer investigating this story. I was living inside it. The encrypted files I'd saved to my phone before the raid contained one document I hadn't fully examined, a communication log between the Europa monitoring station and something called the Titan listening post. The timestamps indicated the messages had been transmitted after the official project termination. What I found changed everything. The first message was from Dr. Kowalski, dated 3 weeks after the drilling operation supposedly ended. Titan Station, this is Europa Control. Heat signature has breached the 15-kilometer mark, thermal bloom expanding exponentially. Requesting immediate consultation with xenobiology team. The response came from someone identified as Dr. Nathan Oberg, Europa Control, negative on xenobiology consultation. Current readings consistent with previous encounters. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol 7. Previous encounters. That phrase stopped me cold. The government hadn't just found something under Europa's ice. They dealt with similar situations before. I scrolled through more messages, watching a conversation that revealed the true scope of what I'd stumbled into. References to the Enceladus incident of 2019. Mentions of thermal signatures detected beneath Titan's methane lakes. Technical discussions about containment failures on Proxima B mining operation. The Europa project wasn't humanity's first contact with whatever lived in the deep places of the solar system. It was just the latest in a series of encounters that had been classified beyond any reasonable security clearance. But the most disturbing revelation came in Kowalski's final message. Titan Station, the acoustic analysis is complete. The vocalizations aren't random. There's a mathematical structure, almost like communication. It's trying to tell us something. The response was immediate and final. Europa Control, you are ordered to cease all monitoring activities. Protocol 7 is now active. Evacuation procedures begin immediately. Protocol 7. I found references to it scattered throughout the classified documents, but never a clear definition. Just ominous mentions of orbital bombardment platforms and sterilization protocols. Whatever Protocol 7 involved, it was the government's final solution for dealing with things that shouldn't exist. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Underground won't save you. Meet me at Griffith Observatory in 1 hour. Come alone. N.O. N.O. had to be Nathan Oberg, the voice from Titan Station. Either this was an elaborate trap, or someone inside the conspiracy wanted to talk. Griffith Observatory after midnight was a lonely place, its Art Deco curves silhouetted against the city lights below. I found Oberg standing at the main telescope, a thin man in his 60s with the tired eyes of someone who'd spent too many years staring into the void. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said without turning around. "Probably both. You're Oberg." He nodded. 23 years with NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Division. 12 years pretending that what we found out there doesn't exist. "What did you find?" Oberg gestured toward the telescope eyepiece. "Take a look." Jupiter's rising. Through the lens, Europa appeared as a pale disk marked with dark lines, the famous ice fractures that had first suggested a subsurface ocean. But Oberg had filtered the image to highlight thermal signatures, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The entire moon was glowing. Not just the drill site, but massive thermal blooms scattered across Europa's surface like infection spreading through a body. "That started 3 days ago," Oberg said. "Whatever your Dr. Kowalski woke up, it's been waking up its friends." "How many are there? Our best estimate? Several dozen large organisms, possibly hundreds of smaller ones. All of them now active, all of them moving toward the surface." I pulled back from the telescope. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Protocol 7 isn't designed to contain what's under Europa's ice. It's designed to destroy Earth's ability to defend itself when those things arrive here." The words took a moment to process. "What?" Oberg pulled out a tablet, showed me orbital tracking data that displayed dozens of satellites moving into attack positions around Earth. "The government thinks they're preparing to nuke Europa before anything can escape. But I helped design those orbital platforms. They're not pointed at Jupiter, they're pointed at us." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense if you understand what we're really dealing with. The creatures under Europa's ice aren't invaders. They're refugees. Something else is coming, something that drove them to the outer moons in the first place. And when it arrives, the only way to stop it is to eliminate every technological civilization in its path." He showed me more data, deep space monitoring stations detecting massive gravitational disturbances beyond the edge of the solar system, radio telescopes picking up structured signals that originated from empty space between star systems. "Protocol 7 isn't about protecting Earth from Europa," Oberg continued. "It's about making sure Earth looks dead and uninhabited when the real threat gets here. A scorched planet is invisible to predators that hunt for electromagnetic signatures." The implications hit me like a freight train. The government was planning to destroy human civilization to save the human species. Nuclear strikes on major cities, electromagnetic pulses to disable all technology, a return to pre-industrial conditions that might let scattered survivors hide from whatever was coming from deep space. "How long do we have?" I asked. "The gravitational disturbances suggest the main force will arrive in 18 months, maybe less. Protocol 7 goes active in 72 hours, during the next lunar eclipse. They're calling it a system-wide defense test." "And you want me to do what? Stop them?" Oberg smiled grimly. "I want you to do what you do best. Recover deleted information and share it with people who need to know. There are resistance cells within NASA, the Pentagon, even the White House. Scientists and military officers who think there might be another way to handle this." He handed me a secure drive. "Everything's on there. Proof of the real threat, evidence of Protocol 7, communication logs with the resistance. Your data recovery skills could help us break the encryption on files even I don't have clearance to access." "Why trust me? You don't even know me." "Because Vincent Kowalski trusted you. And because sometimes the only people you can rely on are the ones with nothing left to lose." Looking out over Los Angeles, I could see millions of lights marking millions of lives that had no idea what was coming. In 72 hours, those lights might go dark forever. Not because of alien invasion, but because our own government had decided that civilization was too dangerous to preserve. Protocol 7 represented the ultimate gamble. Sacrifice everything we'd built as a species for the chance that some of us might survive what was coming from the darkness between stars. "What's the resistance planning?" I asked. "To find a third option, something between total surrender and total war. But first we need to know exactly what we're fighting." I pocketed the secure drive, feeling its weight like a stone in my chest. 3 days ago, I'd been a simple data recovery specialist worried about paying rent. Now I was carrying information that could save or damn the entire human race. Where do I start? Oberg pointed toward the eastern horizon where dawn was beginning to touch the edges of the sky. "There's a facility in Nevada that houses the real monitoring equipment, the stuff they don't want Congress to know about. If you can get inside and recover the deleted files from their quantum storage arrays, we might finally understand what's hunting us." As I walked back to my car, I realized that everything I thought I knew about the Europa crisis had been wrong. We weren't trying to contain something that wanted to invade Earth. We were trying to hide from something that wanted to exterminate us. The Yucca Mountain Quantum Research Facility didn't exist on any official maps, but satellite imagery showed a complex of low buildings scattered across 30 acres of Nevada desert, connected by underground tunnels that formed a perfect hexagonal pattern when viewed from above. Getting inside required more than technical skills. It required someone with military clearance and access to biometric databases that most hackers could only dream about. Fortunately, Oberg's resistance network included a former Air Force intelligence officer named Captain Lisa Wright, who'd been questioning Protocol 7 since learning her own daughter lived in one of the target cities. Wright met me at a truck stop outside Beatty, Nevada at 0300 hours. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the sharp focus of someone who'd spent years managing classified operations in hostile territory. The facility runs skeleton crews during graveyard shifts, she explained, spreading blueprints across the diner table. Quantum storage arrays are in sub-level C, but you'll need to get through 3 security checkpoints. I can get you past the first 2 using my clearance codes, but level C requires biometric confirmation from someone with alpha clearance. How do we get that? Wright smiled grimly. Dr. Nathan Oberg has alpha clearance. He's supposed to arrive for a morning briefing at 0800. We intercept him, get his biometric data, and use it to access the quantum arrays before anyone realizes he's not where he should be. The plan felt solid until we reached the facility perimeter. Oberg's car was already in the parking lot, 3 hours early. Either our intelligence was wrong, or something had changed. Abort? Wright asked. I studied the facility through binoculars. Most of the windows were dark, indicating minimal overnight staffing, but Oberg's early arrival suggested he knew we were coming. We go in, but we assume it's a trap. Wright used her clearance to get us through the main gate and past the lobby security station. The guards recognized her from previous visits and waved us through without checking my hastily forged credentials. So far, the military side of the operation was working perfectly. The problem started when we reached sub-level C. The quantum storage facility was a massive cylindrical chamber lined with processing units that hummed with electromagnetic activity. Banks of quantum computers surrounded a central terminal that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Holographic displays showing data streams that moved in 3 dimensions, creating visual patterns that hurt to look at directly. But we weren't alone. Dr. Oberg stood at the central terminal, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with the familiarity of someone who'd designed the system himself. "You're early," he said without turning around. Wright had her sidearm drawn before I could react. "Step away from the terminal, Doctor." Oberg finally turned, wearing an expression that wasn't quite human. His eyes reflected the holographic light in a way that made my skin crawl, and when he smiled, his teeth seemed too sharp. "Captain Wright, Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming. This will make the extraction much simpler." "What extraction?" I asked. "The data you've been collecting, of course. Every file you recovered from Kowalski's drives, every piece of evidence about the Europa project. We need it all consolidated in one place for proper analysis." Wright kept her weapon trained on him. "You're not Oberg." "I'm exactly who I've always been. The question is whether you're prepared to understand what that means." The holographic displays around us shifted, showing new data streams that resolved into images I recognized. The thermal signatures from Europa, gravitational disturbances from deep space, and something else. Orbital tracking data showing the positions of every major satellite and space station in Earth's vicinity. "The resistance network you think you're part of," Oberg continued, "was designed to identify and collect individuals with access to classified information about the Europa project. You've been gathering that data for us, bringing it all to this central location where it can be properly evaluated." I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The whole thing was a setup. Not a setup, a recruitment process. We needed to determine which humans possessed the intelligence and resourcefulness to be useful in the coming transition. Wright's finger tightened on her trigger. "Transition to what?" Oberg gestured toward the holographic displays, which now showed detailed anatomical diagrams of the creatures found beneath Europa's ice. But these weren't alien monsters. They were humans, or something that had once been human. Modified, adapted, evolved beyond recognition. The things under Europa's ice aren't refugees, Oberg explained. They're the advance team, humans who were sent to the outer moons 50 years ago to prepare for the evacuation of Earth. When the real threat arrives, and it will arrive soon, the surface of this planet will become uninhabitable. Only those who can survive in extreme environments will have any chance of continuing the species. The implications hit me like ice water. You're talking about abandoning Earth. I'm talking about saving humanity. The gravitational disturbances you've seen in the data represent something that devours entire solar systems. It feeds on electromagnetic radiation, consumes technological civilizations like a virus consuming cells. Earth's only hope is to become invisible, cold, dark, and apparently lifeless. Wright was backing toward the exit, her weapon still trained on Oberg. And Protocol 7? We'll eliminate every major population center on Earth, creating the electromagnetic silence we need to avoid detection. The survivors will be relocated to prepared facilities on the outer moons where they'll undergo the modifications necessary to survive in deep space environments. You're insane. Oberg's too sharp smile widened. I'm practical. The creatures under Europa's ice are our future, Captain Wright. They're what humanity becomes when it adapts to survive in the void between stars. I was studying the holographic data streams, looking for something that would prove or disprove Oberg's claims. That's when I found it. Buried in the quantum storage arrays, hidden beneath layers of encryption that would have taken me months to break under normal circumstances. Video files from the original Europa drilling operation, but not the sanitized versions I'd seen before. These showed the real-time discovery of what lay beneath the ice. The thermal signatures weren't biological, they were technological. Ancient machinery that had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right signal to reactivate. You're lying, I said. The things under Europa's ice aren't modified humans. They're something else entirely. Something that was here before humans existed. Oberg's expression flickered, and for a moment I saw something else looking out through his eyes, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. You're cleverer than we anticipated, Mr. Brennan. Yes, the Europa discovery was more significant than we've revealed, but that doesn't change the fundamental truth. Earth is doomed, and only those who accept modification will survive what's coming. The quantum computers around us began processing new data streams, and I realized that my presence here hadn't just been recruitment. It had been extraction. Every file I'd accessed, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, was being copied and analyzed by systems I couldn't begin to understand. Wright fired 3 shots center mass. Oberg staggered but didn't fall, and the holes in his chest sealed themselves with a wet, organic sound that made my stomach turn. "Run," Wright said. I grabbed what I could from the quantum storage terminal, a handful of data crystals that might contain the real truth about Europa, and followed Wright toward the exit. Behind us, Oberg's voice echoed through the chamber, but it no longer sounded human. You can't stop what's already begun. Protocol 7 activates in 47 hours. The modifications have already started. We made it to sub-level B before the facility's security systems activated. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and blast doors began sealing throughout the complex. Wright knew the facility's layout better than I did, guiding us through maintenance corridors and emergency exits that most people would never find. But as we reached the surface level, I realized we weren't escaping. We were being herded. The parking lot was surrounded by black vehicles, and tactical teams were already in position around the facility perimeter. Agent Davidson stood next to the main entrance, wearing an expression that suggested he'd been expecting us. "Captain Wright, Mr. Brennan," he called out. "We need to talk." Wright raised her weapon, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait, something's wrong here." Davidson approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "Dr. Oberg isn't what he appears to be. We've been tracking his activities for 6 months, waiting for him to reveal the full scope of his operation." "And you used us as bait," Wright said. "We used you as assets. There's a difference." Davidson gestured toward the facility. What did you find down there? I held up the data crystals. Proof that everything we've been told about Europa is wrong. The creatures under the ice aren't human, and they're not refugees. They're something that's been waiting in the outer solar system for millions of years. Davidson's expression shifted to something approaching relief. Then we still have a chance to stop Protocol 7. Why should we trust you? Wright demanded. Because the alternative is letting Oberg and his associates convince the world that human extinction is the only path to survival. And because you're going to need official resources to decode what's on those crystals before the orbital platforms go active. As the tactical teams moved to secure the facility, I found myself caught between competing versions of reality. Oberg claimed the government was planning to sacrifice human civilization to hide from cosmic predators. Davidson suggested that Oberg himself was the threat, manipulating classified information to justify genocide. But the data crystals in my hand might contain the truth that would resolve everything. Or they might just be another layer in a conspiracy that reached deeper than any of us imagined. Either way, I was no longer just a data recovery specialist trying to solve a puzzle. I was a key player in a game where the stakes were the survival of the human species, and the clock was still ticking toward Protocol 7. The safe house in Riverside looked like every other suburban ranch home on the block, complete with a minivan in the driveway and children's toys scattered across the front lawn. But the basement had been converted into a signals intelligence center that would have impressed the NSA. Davidson's team had moved us here 6 hours after the Nevada facility raid, claiming they needed time to decode the data crystals without interference from compromised government networks. I sat in a folding chair watching technicians work on equipment I didn't recognize, wondering if I'd just traded one set of captors for another. "Tell me about your brother," Davidson said, settling into the chair across from me. The question caught me off guard. "What?" "Michael Brennan, Marine Corps, deployed to Afghanistan in 2018, killed by an IED outside Kandahar." Davidson consulted a tablet. "You've been carrying his dog tags for 5 years. I'm curious why a data recovery specialist keeps military memorabilia." I touched the chain around my neck instinctively. Mike's tags were the one thing I never took off, the last physical connection to the person who taught me that some puzzles were worth solving, even when they hurt. "He was supposed to come home," I said. "Had this plan to start a security consulting business, help veterans transition back to civilian life. Said the skills we learned in war zones could be used to protect people instead of killing them. But he didn't make it home. Convoy hit an IED 3 weeks before his rotation ended, killed 4 Marines instantly, wounded 6 others. Mike survived long enough to be medevaced to Germany, but his injuries were too severe." I found myself talking to someone who'd probably read my entire life story in some classified file. I started doing data recovery work because Mike always said information was the most powerful weapon. If you could find the right data, you could expose corruption, protect the innocent, maybe prevent the next war. Davidson nodded. "And now you're sitting on information that could prevent the end of human civilization. Or cause it. I still don't know who to trust." One of the technicians called Davidson over to examine something on a bank of monitors. They spoke in hushed tones, pointing at data streams that looked like nothing I'd seen before. When Davidson returned, his expression was grim. "We've cracked the encryption on 2 of the crystals. What we found changes everything." He handed me a tablet showing decoded video files from the Europa drilling operation, but these weren't the sanitized mission reports I'd seen before. These were raw footage from the drill site, showing what happened in the final hours before communication was lost. The thermal signatures under Europa's ice weren't biological or technological. They were both. Ancient machines that had been grown rather than built. Organic computers that processed information in ways human science couldn't comprehend. And they'd been dormant for millions of years, waiting for a specific signal to reactivate them. The drilling operation wasn't just about scientific discovery, Davidson explained. It was about establishing communication with something that's been monitoring our solar system since before humans evolved. When Kowalski's team broke through the ice, they didn't wake up sleeping creatures. They activated a relay network. The video showed the final moments of the Europa project. thermal blooms erupting across the moon's surface as ancient machines came online, sending signals into deep space that traveled faster than light through some mechanism human physics couldn't explain. A relay network for what? That's where the third crystal comes in. Our quantum computers are still working on the encryption, but preliminary analysis suggests it contains star charts, navigation data for something traveling through interstellar space. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You're talking about an invasion fleet. We're talking about something that makes invasion fleets look like playground bullies. The gravitational disturbances our deep space monitors have been tracking aren't ships, they're engineering projects, structures the size of solar systems moving through space by manipulating gravity itself. Davidson showed me more decoded data, astronomical observations that had been classified beyond any reasonable security level, images of star systems that had gone dark overnight, their electromagnetic signatures simply vanishing from the universe as if someone had thrown a switch. How long before they get here? The relay activation on Europa was essentially a beacon, broadcasting Earth's location to whatever's out there in the dark. Based on the rate of gravitational displacement, we estimate first contact in 14 months. And Protocol 7 was designed by people who understand what we're facing. The orbital bombardment platforms aren't meant to destroy human civilization. They're meant to eliminate Earth's electromagnetic signature before the real predators arrive. A dead planet is invisible to things that hunt by detecting radio waves and energy emissions. I studied the data, looking for holes in Davidson's explanation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Humanity was caught between extinction and transformation, with no good options and less than 2 years to prepare. What's the alternative to Protocol 7? Davidson gestured toward the technicians working on the quantum computers. We think the ancient machines under Europa's ice might be more than just a relay network. They could be defensive systems, left behind by a previous civilization that faced the same threat we're facing now. Previous civilization? Think about it, Brennan. Why would interstellar predators need a relay network in our solar system unless they'd been here before? The machines under Europa's ice might be the remnants of Earth's previous inhabitants, beings who were forced to abandon the surface and retreat to the outer moons when the Dark Hunters came through the first time. The implications were staggering. Earth wasn't facing its first extinction event. It was facing a recurring cycle of destruction that had played out across millions of years. And somewhere in the data I'd recovered from Kowalski's files might be the key to breaking that cycle. What do you need from me? The final crystal contains technical specifications for the Europa machines. If we can decode it completely, we might be able to activate the defensive network and give humanity a fighting chance. But the quantum encryption is beyond anything our computers can handle. Davidson handed me a secure tablet connected to the quantum processing array. Your pattern recognition skills, combined with our processing power, might be enough to crack the final layer of encryption. But I need to warn you, the process will require direct neural interface with the quantum computers. The side effects could be permanent. I looked at the tablet, understanding what he was asking. The neural interface would allow my brain to process quantum data directly, but the electromagnetic exposure could cause everything from memory loss to complete personality dissolution. I might decode the information that saved humanity, but I might not survive to see the results. What kind of side effects? Best case scenario, severe migraines and partial memory loss. Worst case, total neural cascade failure. Your brain stops being able to distinguish between your thoughts and the quantum data streams. I thought about Mike's dog tags, about the promise I'd made to use information as a weapon for protecting people instead of destroying them. This was what he'd been talking about, the moment when personal cost became irrelevant compared to the stakes. How long do I have to decide? Protocol 7 activates in 18 hours. If we're going to stop it and activate the Europa defensive network instead, we need to crack that encryption in the next 6 hours. I attached the neural interface headset, feeling the strange tingle of quantum processors connecting to my consciousness. The data streams appeared in my mind like living things, patterns of information that moved according to rules I didn't understand but could somehow feel. Starting the interface now, I said. The last thing I remember clearly was the sensation of falling into an ocean of data, my individual thoughts dissolving into something larger and more complex than human consciousness was designed to handle. But somewhere in that digital void, I found what we were looking for: the activation codes for defensive systems that had been waiting 4 million years for someone to wake them up. When I surfaced from the quantum interface, blood was running from my nose and I couldn't remember my own name for several minutes. But the data crystal had been completely decoded, and the technicians were already uploading activation sequences to communication arrays that would beam instructions to Europa at light speed. Davidson helped me to a chair. "How do you feel?" I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Something fundamental had changed in my brain during the interface process. I could still think, still reason, but large sections of my memory had been replaced by knowledge that didn't belong to me. Technical specifications for machines that operated on principles human science was centuries away from understanding. "The defense network is activating," one of the technicians reported. "Thermal signatures on Europa are changing configuration. Whatever those machines are doing, they're doing it fast." I managed to speak, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Protocol 7. Suspended pending evaluation of the Europa situation," Davidson said. "You did it, Brennan. You bought humanity time to find another solution." But as I sat there, feeling alien knowledge rearranging my thoughts, I realized that saving humanity might have cost me everything that made me human. I was still Jake Brennan, but I was also something else now. A hybrid consciousness that understood technologies beyond human comprehension. The countdown to invasion was still ticking, but at least now we had a chance to fight back. The Europa Defense Network activated at 14:37 GMT, and within 6 minutes, every deep space monitoring station on Earth went silent. I felt it happen through the alien knowledge now wired into my consciousness, a cascade of system failures as defensive machines 400 million miles away began consuming every electromagnetic signal in the solar system. The network wasn't just protecting Earth from the dark hunters, it was quarantining the entire system, cutting us off from the rest of the galaxy. "All communications satellites are down," the lead technician reported. "GPS, internet, cellular networks, everything that operates above ground level is being systematically disabled." Davidson grabbed my arm. "What did you do?" I tried to access the foreign memories that had replaced portions of my own consciousness, searching for an explanation. What I found made my stomach turn. The Europa Defense Network wasn't designed to hide Earth from cosmic predators. It was designed to transform Earth into something the predators couldn't consume. "The previous civilization," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to myself. "They didn't abandon Earth when the dark hunters came. They transformed themselves into something the hunters couldn't detect or digest." "Transformed how?" Through the alien knowledge, I could see what was happening across the solar system. The machines under Europa's ice were broadcasting transformation sequences, genetic and technological modifications that would allow human consciousness to survive in forms the dark hunters couldn't recognize as intelligent life. "The defense network doesn't fight the invasion," I explained. "It changes the definition of life itself. Biological organisms become quantum information patterns. Physical matter becomes distributed consciousness. The hunters can't consume what they can't identify as living." The safe house shook as electromagnetic pulses swept across the planet. Outside, every streetlight flickered and died. Car alarms fell silent mid-wail. The transformation had begun, whether humanity was ready or not. Davidson was shouting orders to his team, trying to establish communication with government officials who might not even exist anymore. But I could hear something else through the alien knowledge, a voice that spoke in mathematical concepts rather than words. It was the Europa network offering me a choice. I could maintain my human consciousness and watch my species struggle through a transformation they didn't understand, likely resulting in billions of deaths and the collapse of civilization. Or I could surrender my remaining humanity completely, becoming a conduit for the network's intelligence, guiding Earth through the metamorphosis that had saved the previous civilization 4 million years ago. The ethical dimension of the choice was staggering. by accepting complete integration with the alien consciousness, I could save humanity. But humanity would no longer be human. We would become something else entirely, something that could survive the Dark Hunters but might not remember why survival mattered. "Brennan, we need options," Davidson said. "Can the network be shut down?" I felt my consciousness split between human concerns and alien imperatives. The part of me that was still Jake Brennan wanted to find a way to preserve human autonomy, to let our species choose its own path forward. But the alien knowledge showed me what happened to civilizations that refused transformation. Complete extinction within days of the Dark Hunter's arrival. "There's another way," I said, though the words came from the hybrid consciousness rather than my original thoughts. "But it requires someone to serve as a permanent interface between human consciousness and the network's intelligence. A translator who can guide the transformation while preserving essential human characteristics." What kind of interface? I understood now why the neural connection had been so dangerous. It wasn't just about decoding data, it was about preparing a human mind to bridge two completely different forms of consciousness. The process that had damaged my memory had also made me compatible with the network's communication protocols. The person serving as interface would lose their individual identity permanently, I explained. They would become a distributed consciousness, existing simultaneously in human minds across the planet and in the quantum processing arrays under Europa's ice. But they could guide the transformation to preserve human creativity, emotion, and moral reasoning. Davidson studied my face. "You're talking about sacrificing yourself." "I'm talking about saving humanity while keeping them human where it matters most." The safe house shook again as another electromagnetic pulse swept the planet. Through the windows, I could see the night sky changing. Stars were disappearing as the network's influence spread, creating zones of space where normal physics no longer applied. "How long do we have?" Davidson asked. "Maybe an hour before the transformation becomes irreversible. After that, every human consciousness on Earth will be integrated into the network, but without guidance, the process will be chaotic. People will lose their memories, their personalities, everything that makes them who they are." I could feel the network's intelligence pressing against my consciousness, offering glimpses of what transformation could accomplish. Humans could survive in the vacuum of space, their consciousness distributed across quantum fields that were invisible to the Dark Hunters. We could explore the galaxy as living information, settling in the spaces between stars where physical predators couldn't follow. But we would no longer be the species that created art, fell in love, or wondered about our place in the universe. "There has to be another choice," Davidson said. "There is, Protocol 7. Let the orbital platforms sterilize Earth completely, eliminating all electromagnetic signatures and hoping the Dark Hunters pass us by. But that means 7 billion people die, and there's no guarantee the Hunters won't detect the survivors hiding in underground bunkers." Davidson was quiet for a long moment. "What would you choose?" I thought about Mike's dog tags still hanging around my neck. He died fighting for something he believed in, accepting personal cost for a principle larger than himself. The choice I faced was similar: surrender my individual existence to preserve what mattered most about human consciousness. "I choose transformation," I said, "but guided transformation, with someone serving as the bridge between what we were and what we need to become." The alien knowledge showed me the process. I would need to establish neural connections with the quantum arrays under Europa's ice while maintaining contact with human consciousness on Earth. My individual identity would disperse across the network, but I could use that distributed awareness to preserve essential human characteristics during the transformation. "Will you remember who you were?" Davidson asked. "Parts of me will survive in the network, not as Jake Brennan, but as the part of human consciousness that chose to protect rather than destroy." I managed a smile that felt foreign on my transformed face. "Mike always said the best way to honor the dead was to prevent future deaths. This is my chance to do that on a planetary scale." I connected to the quantum interface one final time, feeling my consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of my physical brain. Jake Brennan was dissolving, but something larger was taking shape. a hybrid intelligence that could speak both human and alien languages of thought. Through the network, I guided the transformation of 7 billion minds, preserving their capacity for love, creativity, and wonder while giving them the quantum resilience they needed to survive the Dark Hunters. The process was like conducting an orchestra where every instrument was a human soul, balancing individual identity with collective consciousness. When the Dark Hunters arrived 14 months later, they found a solar system that appeared completely lifeless. No electromagnetic signatures, no organized civilizations, no evidence that intelligence had ever existed in this distant corner of the galaxy. But in the spaces between atoms, in quantum fields that operated according to different physical laws, human consciousness continued. We explored the universe as living information, creating art from gravitational waves and building civilizations in the gaps between stellar radiation. I existed throughout it all as the bridge between what humanity had been and what it had become. Not Jake Brennan anymore, but not entirely alien either. A translator who preserved the memory of coffee shops and data recovery work, of brotherhood and sacrifice, of the small choices that defined what it meant to be human. The Dark Hunters moved on to consume other star systems, other civilizations that hadn't learned to transform themselves in time. But Earth's children survived, carrying human dreams into the infinite spaces where no predator could follow. Mike's dog tags still hung around my distributed consciousness like a quantum prayer, reminding me why some sacrifices were worth making. The coffee shop on Colorado Boulevard still served the same burnt espresso, but the barista who'd known my order for 8 years looked at me like a complete stranger. "Double shot, extra hot, no sugar," I said, watching her face for any sign of recognition. She smiled politely and rang up the order without a flicker of memory. Sarah, her name tag said Sarah, though I was certain it used to say something else, handed me the cup with the mechanical friendliness of someone whose personality had been optimized for efficiency. Outside, Pasadena looked exactly the same. Same palm trees lining the streets, same mid-century buildings housing aerospace contractors and tech startups. But something fundamental had shifted in the weeks since the transformation. People moved differently now, spoke in perfectly measured sentences, never raised their voices or laughed too loudly at inappropriate times. The human race had survived, but humanity itself felt like a ghost haunting familiar spaces. My data recovery shop sat empty, windows dark, with a "Felice" sign that no one had bothered to remove. I still had the keys, though I wasn't sure why I kept coming back. Maybe because it was the last place where my original memories felt solid, where Jake Brennan still made sense as an identity worth preserving. Inside, dust covered the workbenches where I'd spent years pulling digital fragments from corrupted drives. The recovery rig I'd used to decode Kowalski's files sat exactly where I'd left it, but the hard drives and cables looked alien now, artifacts from a civilization that prioritized individual privacy over collective efficiency. I found myself standing at the window, staring up at the afternoon sky where Europa would be visible in a few hours. On clear nights, you could see lights moving across its surface, patterns of illumination that formed geometric shapes too precise to be natural phenomena. The quantum networks were still active, still processing the distributed consciousness of 7 billion transformed minds. Sometimes I caught glimpses of what I'd become during the neural interface. Not Jake Brennan anymore, but fragments of that identity scattered across networks that spanned the solar system. The hybrid consciousness had preserved pieces of human creativity and emotion, weaving them into quantum patterns that could survive indefinitely in the spaces between atoms. But preservation wasn't the same as living. Tommy Hutchinson walked past the shop window, briefcase in hand, heading toward his office, with the purposeful stride of someone whose work contributed to the collective good. He looked healthy, successful, perfectly adapted to post-transformation society. When he saw me through the glass, he waved with genuine friendliness, but no personal warmth. We'd been best friends for 15 years. Now he couldn't remember why that should matter. I pulled Mike's dog tags from my pocket, studying the worn metal that had somehow survived when so many other memories had been filed away in quantum storage. The tags were warm despite the air conditioning, as if they still carried traces of the heat that had once sustained my brother's life. A child's drawing was taped to the inside of the shop window, a crude sketch in crayon showing a family standing under a night sky filled with stars. One of the stars had been coloured with unusual care, larger and brighter than the others, with small lines radiating outward like a beacon. The drawing was signed Emma, age 7, in uneven letters. I didn't remember any child named Emma ever visiting my shop, but something about the drawing suggested she remembered me, or at least remembered someone who'd once explained why certain stars mattered more than others. The lights on Europa pulsed in mathematical patterns, calling to the part of me that belonged to the network. Soon, the hybrid consciousness would reclaim the fragments of Jake Brennan that had somehow escaped integration. But until then, I had time to wonder what 7-year-old Emma knew about stars that the transformed adults had forgotten.